Namaste from India, and this is Arunodaya Deseret Eye Hospital, and we'll be dealing with the cutting edge practices in ophthalmology. We have a team of our doctors here, specialized doctors here, and we'll be going through different aspects of different technologies and different cutting edge practices that we are using here in Arunodaya Deseret Eye Hospital. And also, we'll be giving you a little outline of the COVID-19 and the different eye problems that we're facing because of people coming back who've already had COVID or during issues that they're having during their COVID pandemic. So I'll start the session with the talk, which says shock to a surprise, a refractive surprise after IOL implantation. So really, cataract surgery is now has undergone a paradigm shift. It's more of a refractive surgery, and we need to give very good results to our patients, especially the ones which we promise to them. And sometimes what happens is that these patients, some of your patients, if they are extreme hyperopes because of their small eyes, they are extreme myopes because of the large axial lens, or they've had dense white Brunison or Brunison cataracts, where the optical biometry is showing low SNR and the efficiency of the biometers is not that much, or their post-RK, PRK LASIK patients. It's always a challenge to really point out which is the lens power that we should be giving the maximum satisfaction to the patient. Post-PK or anterior segment dysgenesis patients, and sometimes there's just no warnings. We can have patients who are giving us these refractive surprises. We need to determine what went wrong. The moment we have a patient who's come up with a surprise, we need to find out what went wrong. Was it the biometry? Was it the incorrect formula that was used for this patient? Is that there a data entry that has been made a mistake in, or we have not given the right IOL to the patient, the correct placement of the IOL, it has to be in the bag, not upside down, or if there is any posterior segment anomaly. There are certain tips and tricks in biometry which we must keep in mind. Often errors of biometry are in contact methods, because what happens is either we are indenting too much, or we are, or there is a difference with whether we're not indenting right at the center. So accordingly, we may have a myopic shift or a hyperopic shift. And non-contact tonometers, biometers, it also depends on the density of the cataract, where the SNR is reduced. So in these cases, wherever we get the SNR is reduced, we must take two sources of biometry. The biometry should always be done in both the eyes if there is a discrepancy or a difference of more than 0.3 millimeters, and or if there is consecutive measurements which differ for more than 0.2 millimeters in their axial length, or if irregular Myers and keratometry with a dry eyes, you must repeat the patient's biometry again. Ideally, the patient should be asked to come back again, after they've used lubricating drops or they've had a treatment for their dry eyes, and repeat two different methods: optical biometry as well as you can do the immersion contact biometry. There are different new age optical biometers which have the Barrett's formula universal 2, which that's what we are using in our practice in all our cases. So all these patients, we need to also keep in mind that what is the right kind of formula we have used in these cases, and toric calculations and the SIA should be kept in mind. www.apacrs.org is a good site to go into and find out what exactly is going to be the chart that you're going to follow during the surgery and the IOL placements. The toric calculations to predict the cylindrical outcomes in the pre-op counseling is very, very important. So you need to have a checklist, double check your IOL powers every time, detail IOL biometry, the eye to be operated, the pre-op, intra-op, post-op, every bit has to be checked properly. The surgeon, the assistant, the OR in charge, so that there is no wrong IOL access or wrong IOL that has been handed over to you during the surgery. The IOL placement should always be in the bag, and make sure there is no tilt of the IOL is centered, and especially when there are capsular bags which are weak or zonules which are weak, there is no bad centration of the IOLs. No upside down IOLs. You need to find out whether the IOL has been placed correct axis, correct power, and in case of phakic IOLs, it's very important to measure the anterior chamber depth and the wall size and the proper placement of the lenses. Look out for other problems in the eye. Like I said, a proper eye examination. Dry eyes and ocular surface disease is very, very important to keep in mind, because whenever this has happened, the patients will be giving you wrong optical biometry, errors will be there, and the patient will always be unhappy. So treat them for the dry eyes before you do the surgeries. The management in case the surprises, You just talk to the patient, tell them that if they're satisfied with glasses, if there's a small error only, or would like to have contact lenses, or would like to give some relaxing incisions that will make the difference, a LASIK correction over the eye after you waited for the eye to heal, IOL exchange and piggyback IOLs. These are the other modalities. Now, the first case which I like to show you is about a case in which we needed to exchange the IOL. The lens that was handed over was somehow there was some error in their transcription, so it was not the correct lens. Now, in these cases, since this case was almost like about 4 weeks post-op, so because the patient was outstation patient, so it's very important to put in a good viscoelastic, protect your corneal endothelium because you are going to be doing a lot of maneuvers inside the anterior chamber. Release all the adhesions that you see between the anterior capsule and the lens. It's very important to go all around it before trying to shift the lens all around or before trying to rotate it. Then once you feel that all these adhesions are out, put in more viscoelastic and gently start nudging the lens out of the bag. If you have a nice support of the haptic, just put your dialer there and put in more viscoelastic as and when you feel that the anterior chamber is shallowing. Lift the IOL. Don't try and pull the IOL because if you do that, you may just pull the bag because you're not very sure as to whether there are adhesions of the haptic with the equator or the capsular bag posterior. So you need to just put in more, nudge the IOL. Once the IOL is inside in the anterior chamber, my technique is to do a lens implantation behind the IOL. And once this has two important things. Number one, my cornea is very well protected. And number two thing is that my posterior capsule is also well protected when I'm going to be cutting this lens and taking it out. So the lens, the right power lens is put into the bag, very gently nudged into position. And now with a big, we need to just put in a lot of viscoelastic, take the lens, cut it into pieces. This is a very nice cutter that we have. Take out these lens bits. You can cut as many pieces you feel comfortable to take out of this section. Maybe four small pieces would be fine or 3 pieces, but gently nudge the lens out. And as and when you feel that there is no viscoelastic, just put in more viscoelastic because that is going to save the cornea for the next day and the patient will be happy, because now the patient is also a little restless and they also want to have proper vision and a good outcome of this exchange also. So gently you can take out all these pieces and you'll see that there is not much of a problem in the surgery in these cases. Now, in cases of IOL, where you put in a toric IOL, sometimes what happens is that the position in which you put in is giving them refractive surprise. So go back, calculate and check. Mark the eye again before taking the patient into the OR. And since you have some adhesions on the anterior capsule, very gently with your viscoelastic, just try and nudge the lens and remove all these adhesions. You see that there are a lot of these membranous type of, these exudate type of adhesions between the capsule and the IOL. Try and remove these. Once you see that the IOL is free and it's mobile, then you can go inside with your dialer, take it to position and try to move the lens. And always remember that the lens will be moving clockwise and you can just put the lens back into position as to the marked intended axis. Out here is almost a 90-degree shift of the axis. And once we did that, we had good results. And then you can do an IA, take out the viscoelastic, and we can proceed like you do for any other case. Now, sometimes what happens is that you see that the position of the eye, the haptic is not correct. It's not in the bag. Like in this case, the haptic was in the anterior chamber. Again, you just need to put in a side incision, put in your viscoelastic and redial the haptic into the bag. This is a case of an add-on IOL. We see that in this patient, the patient was operated elsewhere and the patient had a lot of toric, a lot of astigmatism. So this lens was loaded. You need to be very careful as to the correct positioning of the lens. And once the lens is loaded with viscoelastic into the cartridge, after you have seen that there are no adhesions of the capsule of the iris onto the lens, which is already there inside the eye, and the eye has been marked as to what axis you need to put in the lens. The sulcus fixation lens is then injected, and you see that the leading haptics are already there in the sulcus. The following haptics are also nudged into the sulcus, and the lens is marked with the toric lens is marked, and you just shift it onto the axis. So this way the patient gets good results. These lenses are very, very thin lenses, and they're very friendly, and the post-op results are also quite satisfactory. So the future really lies in a very flawless biometry. You need to have a post-operative, proper patient. The patient should be satisfied, as many patients as can be possible. Post-operatively, we need to have probably a touch-up of the refraction by changing the lens itself. Like we are doing, there are a lot of trials that are going on, maybe the femtosecond laser that could just touch up the lens as well, the IOL as well, so that we have better outcomes in the future. Thank you very much. And if there are any questions, please put them in the chat group. And after this talk, I would like to invite our next speaker, and that is Dr. Vaibhav Sethi. He'll be talking about treating aphakia with secondary IOL options, the VR surgeon's approach.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for the lovely presentation, Dr. Reena. And I'll be presenting on different IOL options after a dislocated or an aphakic lens, after a dislocated lens lumen, or in case of aphakia. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can. Yes.
Thank you. So we are putting it that way, the vitreoretinal surgeon's perspective. Other than anterior chamber intraocular lens and a sulcus fixated lens, which are actually, the sulcus fixated lens will be actually a very good option. In case those are not possible, how do we tackle aphakia or dislocated IOL back complexes? Procedure 1, we can do an iris claw approach, which I do very often. So this was an elderly gentleman who had a dislocated bag and anterior chamber, dislocated bag and IOL complex. So what I did first was I made a scleral tunnel incision, a sclerocorneal tunnel around 6 millimeters, because I wanted to remove the IOL with the bag. And I also placed my 3 23 gauge ports. The most important key steps I'll be telling you one by one. So very important to do a proper anterior vitrectomy, clear the vitreous around the IOL and in the pupillary area. That's very, very important, because any inadvertent drag on the IOL without clearing the vitreous around it can cause massive tears. Even a giant retinal tear is possible, and dialysis have been well reported. Very important to do a thorough vitrectomy, and more importantly, do a complete PVD. No pull, no traction on the IOL. That's very, very essential. Even if you feel that IOL is cleared off from the vitreous, don't make an attempt. The confirmatory sign is when the IOL falls back on the posterior pole. That is when you're sure that it has been disengaged from the peripheral vitreous area. So after doing that, you could have different approaches. You could either use active suction on the optic, or you could, in my case, what I did was I used an ILM forceps, or even you could use other forceps, but you should be comfortable with them and use them before as well. So catch the IOL and the optic haptic junction as I did here, and slowly and steadily bring it up in the visual axis. After that, switch out with the other hand, with the dominant or non-dominant hand, whichever you're comfortable with. Extend the cornea stellate tunnel, open it up all across. Be patient. Very important to be patient. After that, ask the assistant to be prepared. Switch over to the McPherson or the IOL holding forceps and go into the tunnel and hold on to the haptic, or if you can, haptic and optic itself, but haptic would be preferable. Be sure you don't put excessive pressure. Otherwise, what will happen is you can actually break the haptic at the junction of the optic at this particular stage. The other thing that you should be well ready of is made side port entries. In this case, I already made 2 side port entries, 180 degree apart and 3 at 9 o'clock. So I go ahead and with the help of a dialer or a spatula, just levitate and bring the optic above in the pupillary axis and try to bring it to the anterior chamber, and very carefully, comfortably, just be careful and deliver out the IOL with both the haptics. Now, this is a stage where sometimes people become a bit tensed. I would say they become a bit aggressive. When the haptic is touching the iris, they forget about that part and the pull, and this could cause a massive iridodialysis. So we need to prevent that. So be very careful, be as atraumatic as possible. A very, very important step after this is do a peripheral 360-degree retinal examination. Make sure you haven't caused any inadvertent iatrogenic breaks anywhere. After that, place in pilocarpine, constrict the pupil, then take over the lens. The new lens to be placed, this is a retro-fixated iris claw lens, which has 2 claws on either side. Very, very important, before you implant the IOL into the anterior chamber, check the patency of the haptic clips on either side. This is very, very important because sometimes they can be fused and that would cause big problems. You will not realize it and that will complicate your case. So make sure it's patent on both the sides and take your time. Once you've done that and you're sure, now rotate it at such a position so that it's same position as your side ports are, so that it will be very easy for you to maneuver it. Because the end aim is to clip or claw the iris and the posterior aspect of it at the 3 and 9 o'clock position or as close to that as possible. So rotate the IOL. Very, very important to inject viscoelastic before you go in with the iris claw forceps, because there will be shallowing of anterior chamber. You're opening up the tunnel here. So grasp the optic very carefully. Now just slightly go to one of the sides in this case and just maneuver the haptic, one haptic below the iris plane. Once you've done that, just push the iris above. So from that particular haptic area, just tilt it slightly above so you create a mount over there, which will be easy for you to feel and see. Now take a Sinskey hook or whatever you're comfortable with and go at the particular edge where you feel that there is maximum amount of indentation and rub the surface of the iris there. And you will actually feel a click happening. And it clinically looks like a dimple on the iris. That confirms enclavation of the iris haptic, the iris IOL at one side of the position. Again, inject viscoelastic. Switch over your hands. Be patient. It's very important. The IOL right now is stable. It's already enclaved in one of the sides. Don't worry. You're doing the right thing. Again, the other part of the haptic needs to be gently, same way, push the iris up, make a mount like you can see here, and go feel the enclavation. It's very important to feel it because it may be sometimes very difficult to confirm as a dimple. And very, very important, after that, make sure now the IOL is well centered in the pupillary axis and it's enclaved in both the sides. As you can visualize, 2 dimples on either side. Very, very important to create a peripheral iridotomy because sometimes there could be pupillary block in such situations. Then close in the tunnel sclerotomies with cautery, or in case of any doubt, use sutures. The other technique that I use is a very good technique developed by the Arvind Eye Care Group, and it's called the XNIT Scleral Fixated IOL. So this was an elderly female who had a dislocated IOL as well as capsular bag. I've already made side ports and I've already made my corneal stellar tunnel here, as well as placed the 3 trocars and the infusion. So I go in, place in viscoelastic, nudge the IOL capsular bag above, open up the tunnel. Don't be miser, be generous, make a large tunnel because you don't want to be stuck here. You want the IOL to comfortably come out of the capsular bag because you're already making a constant tunnel. Might as well make a big one so that you don't have any discomfort. Now, once the IOL bag is out, do a thorough anterior vitrectomy as well as do a proper vitrectomy all across. Be sure that your ports are clear and everything, visual axis is clear of vitreous, because the maneuvers can sometimes cause inadvertent iatrogenic retinal tears or dialysis. So this is the instrument, the XNIC needle. It's a very, very cheap, less than $10 costing needle, the set of 2. it has two markings, one at 1.5, this one, and the other is 4 millimeters, and each has own use. So here, initially mark, and what I've already done here is I've already marked the two sides where I made the side ports at 3 and 9 o'clock, because that is where I want to externalize my haptics. And that's a 1.5 millimeter distance from the posterior limbus on both sides. I mark them with a die, and I've already created and tunneled 4 millimeters length intrascleral tunnel, one going inferiorly, one going superiorly along the orientation of the haptics. Now I take in the needle. This is a 26 gauge needle, and the advantage of this needle is it is already at an angle, particular angle of 60 degrees, and has a silicone stopper. So each has its own use. So now very gently extrude or bring out the needle. Make sure you don't get struck with the iris tissue. Depress the tunnel, open up tunnel, and bring out the needle. Now, the advantage of this technique is even if the cornea has edema, there's no view, you don't have to do any amount of maneuvers in the pupillary axis or visual axis inside the eye. All the maneuvers, the important maneuvers are happening outside the eye. So you're very comfortable and it's easy to learn. So now a 3-piece IOL is always preferred because you have to have the haptics to externalize. And after you've basically channelized one of the haptics into the lumen of the 26 gauge needle, at the same time, you bring out the 26 gauge needle and push with the IOL. Don't make any forceful maneuvers, otherwise this could lead to a break at the haptic optic junction. Now the advantage of the silicone stopper comes. You place the silicone stopper, bring it down, and externalize the haptic. So the haptic is very secure. You don't need an assistant. You don't need to hold that particular area. And now you can maneuver it and modify it at your convenience and bring the haptic slightly out so that it's easier for you to now externalize the other haptic. So same way, do the maneuver on the other side of the haptic. Channel it through. Be careful, be comfortable. The only issue that I had in some cases was the globe sometimes collapses slightly transiently, which you can see here. But then that's a very, very small issue because the infusion is in place. So always have an infusion in such cases to maintain the globe. Now, once you've externalized both the haptics with the help of the IOL holding forceps, make sure your intrascleral tunnel is adequate, as you can see here. So now hold the haptic at the tip. Don't hold it anywhere else but at the tip, and switch over your hands in case you're doing the nasal side. It helps makes it much more easier. At the tip, when you hold it, it's this step becomes much easier. Hold it as a tip, withdraw it slightly, and then as a closed jaws along with the haptic, just channel the haptic into the scleral pocket that you've created, and then open up the forceps and come out. So this is the way the final centralization of the IOL happens. It's a well-centered lens, and finally you can just close up the ports. And so finally, the moral of the story, according to a sensible surgeon, would be choose the option that is best suited in your particular hands. It could be an anterior chamber intraocular lens, could be a sulcus placed 3-piece lens with optic capture, or it could be an iris claw IOL or a scleral fixated IOL or a Yamane technique. So do what you do best so that you get the best outcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Weber, for showing us so many different techniques of doing these aphakia with secondary IOLs. Dr. Weber is a very prolific surgeon, a vitreoretina surgeon in the hospital, and his patients love him for his patients. Our next speaker is Dr. Aditya Sethi, and he would be speaking about special strokes for the little folks, pearls in perfecting cataract surgery in children. Dr. Aditya is a pediatric ophthalmologist, and so over to him.
Good afternoon, everybody. So very nice topic here. So a little bit about pediatric cataract and the management overview. I hope my slides are visible. Okay, so special strokes for these little folks. So what's special about pediatric cataract surgery? So I have no financial interest in this talk. So before going ahead and deciding on doing a pediatric cataract surgery, I always like to break it down into these questions. So is the cataract visually significant enough? And is surgery really required in this particular cataract? When should we operate, and in which case should we put an IOL? What formula to use, and what is my target post-op refraction? How different is the procedure compared to adult cataract surgery, and how different is my post-op management, and how do I rehabilitate the eye? So what is a visual significant cataract? I think this is one of the most important point in the entire presentation, that we all should know when to operate, when not to operate. Often amblyopia is the cause for the surgery for most surgeons. I beg to differ, because amblyopia could also be secondary to the cataract induced refractive error. So do look at the cataract in a different way. See if you can delay the surgery, or if the surgery is actually really important at the moment, and take care of the amblyopia instead. So what is a visually significant cataract? It's a central cataract bigger than 3 millimeters. A posterior cataract, no clear zones in between. Retinal details are not visible by direct ophthalmoscope. I think this is the most important point. Just shine your direct ophthalmoscope or an indirect ophthalmoscope. If you can see at the back of the eye, it's not a very significant cataract. Nystagmus or strabismus present, or poor central fixation after 8 weeks, like you can see in these pictures. The bottom one being a significant cataract, and the top one being an anterior cataract, so not a very significant cataract to operate on. So different types of cataract we all have an idea about. So can vision be improved with surgery is the next question you have to ask. So take your direct ophthalmoscope, look for the red reflex. If you can see the retina, you can probably delay the surgery. So objectives of the surgery should be to clear the visual axis, remove scaffold for PCO formation, maintain support for IOL, make it least traumatic and with minimal complications, and maintain a rim when you're leaving an aphakia. We saw a beautiful talk by Dr. Vedder about aphakia and secondary IOL, and often these are pediatric cases. So if you have a nice rim, you can place it in the bag. When timing of surgery, earliest is the best, and in unilateral cataracts, earlier than earliest is the best as compared to bilateral. Reason being dense amblyopia in these eyes. High risk of glaucoma in very young cases, like less than 2 months. GA risks in 1 to 2 months of age group, so consider that. And consider the corneal diameter and size of the eye before deciding on placing an IOL. So we've had many studies which differentiated unilateral versus bilateral cataracts. So unilateral cataracts have the abbreviation amblyopia, aggressive post-op rehabilitation is required, and your IOL power has to match the other eye. You can't leave a big gap and a bigger window for amblyopia to set in. A bilateral cataract, onset of cataract is during do it in the window period. Operate before nystagmus and before deprivation amblyopia sets in. Always we do one eye, then plan the other. Very few cases where the child has severe problems, we do bilateral cataract surgery. So when to put an IOL? I think the largest study that everybody quotes for unilateral cataracts is the infant aphakia treatment study. The only study that I recollect about bilateral cataracts in less than 1 year of age or 2 years of age is from India by Dr. Savra, which was published in 2018, which also speaks about implantation versus glaucoma risks in young children. So the rule that is currently being followed is that above 1 year of age, IOL for all children, but less than 1 year of age, we have to look at the corneal diameter, the axial length before deciding on placing the IOL. Which IOL formula to be used? Various studies have quoted and tested these IOL formulas, and I think SRK2 is being the least variable is the favorite for everybody. Another infant aphakia treatment study showed us different variations that can happen, the IOL surprises that can happen. So never be 100% sure, and always counsel for refractive errors which can happen post refractive surprises which can happen post cataract surgery in these cases. And Dr. Reena showed us very good ways of dealing with that. The Barrett's formula, which is online, is very useful. You can just punch in the target refraction you want and you get the eye power, makes it much easier. The rule of 7 is what I follow. That is, the age plus target hyperopia should be 7. This, of course, is in less than 7 years of age. For example, a child with 2 years of age and you need 7, so the target hyperopia that I look for is +5. How pediatric cataracts differ from the adult? It's a unique challenge that has anterior chamber instability, increased capsular elasticity, decreased rigidity, and this leads to higher tendency for PCO formation or visual axial opacification, and nucleus is often soft like putty and easy to aspirate. So head positioning is as important as it can get because it's a general anesthesia. You can't move the head because the tubes are there. So be very careful when you're doing an EUA. You have to place a head ring, make sure there's shoulder support, and stabilize the head. So handling of the anterior capsule, we use preservative-free adrenaline. Stain the capsule with tritone blue under air. See, elasticity is very different. So the pull or the force, vector force should be inwards. Prefer an 5 mm anterior capsular rhexis. Overfill the chamber for better control and use high density viscoelastics whenever possible. Always grasp and regrasp. Go back to the edge of the rhexis and regrasp whenever possible. Otherwise, there'll be a runaway rhexis. Alternate methods, Dr. Nischal has proposed the push and pull, which is very nice technique where we make an incision and then make an incision 180 degree opposite. The one closer to you, you push, and the other one you pull, like in the video. You can also do vitrectomy, which is basically take your vitrectomy, put the base down, put a cut rate of 150 to 300, and make your anterior capsular rhexis. Lens aspiration, again, very easy after a good hydrodissection. The advantages, there's reduction of operative time, less irrigating solution is needed, and facilitation of lens removal. A little idea that always go for the peripheral cortex first before you take that central nucleus. The reason being it really helps in those difficult cases where you, like traumatic cataracts, where the central PC may be ruptured and you will know of it. But if you go for the center first, then you expose yourself to the difficult peripheral cortex removal. And bimanual eye is my favorite because it gives you good access and also helps you tear off every peripheral cortex easily. The PCC, do PCC for all cases under 7 years, that's the norm. I prefer even older children. Reason being is children don't really sit on the yak cap machine as desired like an adult. So it's better to make that posterior capsule opening because we know the PCO is going to happen. So in these cases, you underfill the bag, make it very convex, take a vertical nick, push heavy viscoelastic, frequent grasp and regrasp, again pull towards the center, respect the vitreous, and dye will make it brittle, so avoid that. Anterior vitrectomy, a good anterior vitrectomy is very, very important. You can't just do PPC and leave it. Reason being is you have to clear the anterior vitreous space because that itself provides the scaffold for cells to deposit and cause a PCO. So you do nice vitrectomy, especially under the margins of the PCC that you're going to do, so that there's a nice clearance and the vitreous does not go back. And you can use tricot wherever you're unsure if you remove complete vitreous from the anterior chamber. So there's also a vitrectomy from approach after you put the lens. I prefer to do it before. Anterior chamber, if you go from there, you can tilt the lens and that can cause problems post-op. So you have the pars plana or plicata technique, which preserves the eye position and does a good job. Eye insertion and the choices, remember, it's like landing a plane. It's never goes straight because your PC is open and your anterior chamber is open. So if you put it right in the bag, so like we do, we take a single piece IOL and place it in the bag, or you can use a 3-piece and even place it in the sulcus, but bag fixation is probably the best. I always keep a backup 3-piece IOL because in case things don't go by your plan, you can always use. And the latest locking of the IOL, the posterior capsule can also be tried and done. Closure, always close all your cases with N0 You always give your antibiotic and steroids, injections, because this is a young child and you have to make sure that the future is stable. So endophthalmitis, which is the most scariest part of any surgery of the eye, should be taken care of. Post-op management, Steroids is more often. Antibiotics should be given, cycloplegics should be given, and keep checking for steroid-induced elevation of intraocular pressure. And do not forget the most important part, why you did the surgery. You have to rehabilitate, resume amblyopia management as soon as possible, give glasses as early as possible, and look after the child long term, because it's still a child with who's had a rare problem of cataract in the pediatric age group. So you have to look for the retinal detachments, iritis, glaucoma, amblyopia, frequent refraction changes, and lifetime commitment has to be given to the child. In conclusion, proper evaluation, medical surgery, correct follow-up, and amblyopia therapy all will guarantee a success. And you need special strokes for these little folks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aditya. That's a wonderful talk. You covered mostly every aspect, and all the pearls were really brilliant. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Our next speaker is Dr. Sahiba Sethi, and she's our glaucoma specialist. And she'll be talking about when a small eye becomes a big problem, phacoemulsification in non-ophthalmic eyes, a video presentation. So over to you, Sahiba.
So non-ophthalmos is defined as an abnormal smallness of one or both the eyes in all dimensions in the absence of other ocular defects. It's an extremely rare anomaly with an incidence of 0.004% in the general population. Its clinical features are short axial length of less than 20.5 millimeters, a shallow anterior chamber of less than 3 millimeters, abnormally thickened sclera or choroid of more than 1.7 millimeters, and high lens to eye volume ratio. So the difference between a normal eye and a non-ophthalmic eye is that with progressive shallowing of the anterior chamber and progressive decrease in the axial length of the eye, the volume between the what are the dangers in operating a non-ophthalmic eye? Intraoperatively, the most debilitating complication is hemorrhagic choroidal detachment. This is a video which shows us how a choroidal detachment occurs. So when there is extravasation of fluid into the suprachoroidal space, and when the eye is opened, a sudden drop in intraocular pressure causes an exudation of proteinaceous fluid into the suprachoroidal space, and if very severe, can lead to kissing choroidals, which looks like this. Hence, we do prophylactic sclerotomy in these patients. In an early postoperative period, one can see AC shallowing with progressive development of peripheral anterior synechiae and an intractable angle closure glaucoma subsequently. A late postoperative period could be late choroidal effusion and non-rheumatogenic retinal detachment, which explains the lifelong follow-up of these eyes. Now, surgical planning is very important, which includes thorough patient counseling and adequate IOP control using oral acetazolamide or IV mannitol when required. A proper biometry, including axial length and anterior chamber depth, lens thickness, scleral thickness, and pachymetry must be done. And any associated comorbidity should be looked out for using with the help of UBM, E-scan, a B-scan, gonioscopy, or endothelial cell count using specular microscopy. So now we're going to discuss a few dilemmas which we encounter in these patients. So generally, what type of anesthesia is used? A general anesthesia is preferred because it reduces the upthrust, and also in these cases, an operative time may be prolonged. Whether to do pre or PI or not. When there is a pre-existing angle closure glaucoma is present, a preoperative PI must be done, because it also marginally deepens the AC and has to be done 2 weeks preoperatively at least. However, definitive management of angle closure glaucoma will be lens extraction itself. And glaucoma filtration surgery has very high chance of malignant glaucoma, is something that one must remember. whether to do prophylactic sclerotomy or not. If there is a pre-existing uveal effusion, a sclerostomy is a must, followed by cataract surgery at a later date. If the patient is going to have a bad follow-up, in this case also prophylactic sclerostomy becomes important. And overall, routine use of can be done to prevent dreaded complications like choroidal effusion, suprachoroidal hemorrhage. And in our cases, no uveal or vitreous prolapse was seen through these cases. Next, which IOL formula to be followed? The third and fourth generation formulas of the Q holiday 2 or higher formulas are better compared to SRKT or SRK2 in small eyes. How to select the IOL? Well, choose the highest power IOL available for that patient. There are single piece hydrophobic acrylic IOLs that come in powers up to plus 40 diopter. And any residual referent refractive error can be corrected by using spectacles, contact lenses, piggyback lenses, or corneal refractive surgery. How many IOLs? Aim for a single IOL to start with. Any residual refractive error can be corrected using piggyback lenses, which are most preferably placed one in bag and one in sulcus. Both in the bag can cause high interlenticular opacification. There have been a number of piggyback IOL choices in the market. Now, whether prophylactic anterior vitrectomy is required or not. In most extreme cases, a vitreous stab can create an increased chamber depth. But the greatest challenge for a limited vitrectomy in these cases is the altered anatomy of the nanophthalmic iris. So overall, an anterior vitrectomy can debulk the vitreous and cause a little increased anterior chamber depth. Now I'm going to demonstrate a technique of phacoemulsification in a case of an extremely small eye. The temporal approach is preferred for better exposure. A 360-degree peritomy is done with tagging of all 4 recti muscles, and a prophylactic sclerotomy is made in the supratemporal and the supranasal quadrant, 4 millimeters away from the lumbus. A rectangular flap is created, partial thickness, and dissected completely. On the sterile bed, a triangular flap, 3 by 3 millimeters, is created, and the apex of which is cut from the unblown choroid. And a routine phacoemulsification is carried out with the placement of IOL, followed by tight closure of the conjunctiva. Now, a few things one must remember is 1, to use soft shell technique to protect the endothelium, to avoid fluctuations of the anterior chamber, to prevent effusions postoperatively. A few things that you might face with these patients are suboptimal dilatation, increased positive pressure, or iris prolapse, which is common in these patients. I mean, even a successfully done surgery can leave you with residual refractive error. And in our experience, we felt that the residual refractive error was lesser with Hoffer-Q formula compared to SRKT or SRK2 formulas. These can be dealt with spectacles, contact lenses, piggyback lenses, etc. Now, the postoperative inflammation can also be quite profuse. So, intensive postoperative steroids have to be used. I suggest preoperative NSAIDs in these cases to have a better outcome. Now, even after successful surgery, suboptimal vision can be attributed to foveal underdevelopment, cystoid macular edema, amblyopia, or corneal decompensation. So a lot still has to be done in these cases. So a few projects which are underway in India are customized lenses which are being prepared for powers more than 40 diopters. We may be able to objectively measure the change in the anterior chamber depth after sclerostomy with a microscope mounted OCT. Familial genetics and potential biomarkers within the sclera are also being studied. To sum up, meticulous planning, careful technique, and thorough lifelong follow-up ensures safe and successful outcome in these cases. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Saiba. That was a very good illustrated talk on nanophthalmic eyes, which are always such a challenge to operate for so many reasons. Thank you very much. And our last speaker is Dr. Neha Gandhi, and she'll be talking about COVID-19 and the eyes. So over to you, Dr. Neha.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Neha, and today my topic of discussion is COVID-19 and the ocular condition associated with the COVID-19. So, as we all know, the pandemic by SARS-CoV-19 virus has affected every organ in an unprecedented magnitude. And the ophthalmologists all over the world are reporting various manifestations of the infection in the eye, which can range from small only mild conjunctivitis to the severe complications which we are seeing nowadays, which can be CRAO or mucormycosis. So more than 1,000 articles has been published regarding COVID-19 impact on eye since December 2020. So coming to the pathogenesis of ocular infections, as we all know, the pathogenesis of SARS-2 COVID-19 infection is related to binding of COVID-19 viral spike proteins to the receptors of alveolar receptors of human host cells, which are mainly ACE2 receptors. ACE2 receptors are expressed mainly on the mucosal cells of lungs, kidney, vascular endothelial cells, immune cells, and neurons. In eye, we have found that conjunctival goblet cells and other limbal cells, they have potential where viral spike proteins can adhere to.
Excuse me, Dr. Neha, can you select full screen so it's easier to see your presentation? Thank you very much.
Am I visible?
We cannot see it for now.
You're visible, but presentation is not.
You can just replay the presentation.
Is it visible now?
Yes.
Just go full screen.
Just go to slideshow on top next to the animation.
Now is it visible, sir?
No, ma'am, you have to say full screen.
Yeah.
No. You have to, yeah. Go on top. Wait, can you see that slideshow on top? Yeah, click on slideshow on top.
I think Anita, just let her finish it.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, continue.
Yeah, so coming to conjunctiva and sclera, the most common feature which we see in COVID-19 patient, and sometimes the only manifestation will be conjunctivitis. So follicular conjunctivitis is the most common presentation. Other than follicular conjunctivitis, we can see patients with viral conjunctivitis, hemorrhagic pseudomembranous conjunctivitis, and in sclera, scleritis and episcleritis are the most common presentations. So like in this picture, we can see the third picture. It's referred by, it's a case which was seen by Dr. Aditya, and he has shared this pic with me. So coming to the external ocular manifestations, the meibomian gland dysfunctions, blepharitis, and NLD blockage are the conditions which we are seeing nowadays. And actually we are treating many patients of NLD blockage post-COVID or post-COVID vaccination also. So posterior segment manifestations, they can range from acute macular necrosis, acute macular neuroretinopathy, CRAO, CRVO, subretinal nodules, peripheral retinal hemorrhages, macular hyperpigmentation, retinal sectoral pallor, papillary flame-shaped hemorrhages, hard exudates, cotton wool spots, and vitritis. So these are the few pictures showing the posterior segment manifestations. Subretinal nodules are the most common findings which we generally see in patients who have recovered from COVID. So coming to the neuroophthalmic manifestations, optic neuritis, sixth nerve palsy, third nerve palsy, ocular myasthenia gravis, AD's pupil, bilateral supranuclear gaze palsy, papillophlebitis, and neurogenic ptosis are the features which we generally see. So the orbital manifestations, they range from orbital cellulitis, dacroadenitis, retroorbital pain, orbital mucormycosis, and rarely orbital histiocytic lesions. So this is a picture of a patient who was treated by Dr. Reena ma'am. So showing rhinoorbital mucormycosis, which we are seeing, which we call like black fungus. So coming to the differential diagnosis of ocular manifestation, whether the patient is presenting with the features related to COVID-19 or in general the other DDs are other adenoviral conjunctivitis, bacterial, allergic conjunctivitis, viral keratitis, dry eye syndrome, and chemosis in critically ill patients. So management, most of the problems like conjunctivitis, they are self-limiting. And we generally treat them in antibiotic and lubricating drops. But if patient present to us with the more severe complications like mucormycosis, then we have to treat the patient as by the protocols given. So the take-home message is the ocular shedding of COVID-19 virus via tears is a distinct possibility of which we should be aware. Conjunctivitis or tearing can be the first manifestation or if only the sole manifestation in patient with COVID-19 infections. COVID-19 may trigger or increase the inflammatory or demyelinating disease like ocular myasthenia gravis, we should be aware of. So the ocular examination should be done only after taking all the universal precautions. So coming to the picture, coming to the thing that most of the patients who visit the ophthalmic clinics are elderly, and most of them they present with comorbidities. So telemedicine is the best option nowadays, which we should practice, and we should advise the other ophthalmologists to practice it. It has been observed that physicians most at risk of becoming infected, they include ophthalmologists, ENT surgeons. So because we have to examine the patient via close proximity. So while performing surgery or while examining the patient, we should always take all kinds of universal precautions. These are my references, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Neha. COVID is actually quite an enigma as yet, and we're going to be learning more and more as we, see many more patients. Thank you very much, and I see that there aren't any questions yet, so I think we'll just close the session. Thank you very much, faculty, my faculty of Dr. Vaibhav Sethi, Dr. Aditya Sethi, Sahiba Sethi, and Dr. Neha Gandhi. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.